It's getting exciting as I enter day 5 of building sourdough starter from scratch. On day 4 or the previous day, I fed my starter at 1 to 1 to 1 ratio, and it took less than 12 hours for it to reach its peak position, which was nearly tripled in volume. At about 12 hours after the feeding, it has collapsed very close to its initial height. So I can say that this starter is very active already. Today it doesn't smell bad at all. It smells like a fermented bread dough, so it's really fragrant, almost sweet. Judging from the starter's condition, today is a good day to pay attention to the speed of fermentation to know whether the starter is ready to be used or not. So like usual, I will feed the starter at 1 to 1 to 1 ratio and count how many hours it takes for the starter to reach its peak position. If it's less than 6 hours, it means the starter is ready to be used. For those whose starter doesn't rise after the feeding on the 4th day, just let the starter ferment for about 24 hours. Then you can do feeding whether or not the starter rises. Because it's very likely that some starters are still in transition period on day 5. The average time to build sourdough starter from scratch is about 2 weeks. It can be shorter or longer than that. Some people are very lucky, just like me. It's done in a week or less, but some people have to wait for up to 3 to 4 weeks. For the feeding on this morning of day 5, I used 20 grams starter, 20 grams bread flour, and 20 grams water. I stir all the 3 ingredients until thoroughly mixed and there is no dry flour remaining. Then put the new starter in a clean container or jar and let it rest at warm room temperature like usual, about 28 to 30 degrees Celsius or 82 to 86 degrees Fahrenheit. Remember to put markings on the container to mark the growth of the starter. And also write down the time when the fermentation starts. That way you will know how long it takes for the starter to rise up to its peak position or peak height. Place the lid on the container to make sure the starter doesn't dry out. So every time the starter rises to its maximum height and then collapses, it's time to feed it again. But it's okay if you don't feed it right away. You can wait until a few hours later, maybe when you have time. The starter will not die. Once the starter is active, the only thing that will kill it is heat. You can freeze it or you just let it sit in the fridge or room temperature. It will be fine for a while. This is the discard that I collect. I just put it in the refrigerator. This discard is less active than the starter that has been fed. You can reactivate it by feeding it again, or if you want to use it as is, use it in a recipe that requires flour and liquid. And also it has other leavening agents such as baking powder, baking soda, or instant yeast. After 3 hours of fermentation, my new starter has doubled in volume. The fermentation takes place at very high speed, but I can see that the starter is still able to rise higher because on the surface itself is still smooth. That tells me that it hasn't reached its maximum height yet. When a starter is no longer capable to rise any higher, it will dome and then you will see a lot of bubbles on the surface. So I will let it rest some more until all the flour has been fully digested. Although some bubbles start to appear on this one, the surface is still mostly smooth. So yeah, it's a good idea to just let it rest or let it ferment some more until it exhausts all the food source. After about 4.5 hours, my starter has reached its peak position. The surface domed, but unfortunately I didn't catch that on video. And then it started to flatten and even slightly collapse. Here you can see that the surface is no longer smooth, it's full of bubbles. Even some bubbles have popped. With those signs, I can tell that the star is a tad past its peak position. I will do second feeding on this 5th day because the star has started to collapse. It is time to feed it again. But instead of using 1:1:1 ratio, this time I will use 1:2:2:2. That is 1 part starter, 2 parts bread flour, and 2 parts water. Because I want to know how long it takes for the starter to peak at 1:2:2:2 ratio. How well the starter performs in starter stage paints a picture on how good it is at leavening bread dough. As I cautioned you yesterday or in the previous video, that flow test, even though it's very popular and I used to do that too, it's not accurate in determining whether the starter is good enough to leaven bread dough. Starter only passes flow test when it has enough air in it. So even if starter is already active and ready to leaven bread dough, it will still fail flow test when it's under or over fermented. And starter made with whole grains such as rye flour or whole wheat flour oftentimes fails this test as well. I'm done doing the second feeding on this 5th day, so I let the starter rest at warm room temperature again to make sure that the only variable that I changed is the ratio. I don't know if you catch my mistake, but I used the wrong amount of starter to keep the ratio 1:2:2:2. Since I used 20 grams bread flour and 20 grams water, I should have used 10 grams starter, but instead I used 5 grams starter. So here I will add 5 grams more of starter. After fixing the mistake, I let the starter ferment again at warm temperature. Even at 1:2:2 ratio, my starter still doubles in volume only in 2.5 hours after feeding. It's quite impressive, but it looks like that it's still able to rise higher, so I will just let it ferment some more. Finally, after about 5 hours, my starter has more than tripled in volume. The surface start to flatten, and if I let it sit longer, it will collapse. After seeing what happens in the first and the second feeding, Now I know that my starter is able to leaven bread dough. However, to stabilize microbial activities in the new starter, I will continue feeding it for 1 to 3 days before I will ever do the test bake. I am going to do the final or the third feeding today, and because it's night and the star is already active, I will increase the ratio to 1 to 5 to 5. I will use 4 grams starter and 20 grams bread flour and also 20 grams water. If I use lower ratio, the starter will be out of food in 4 to 5 hours. Meanwhile, I can only check the starter in the morning. So if I use lower ratio, in the morning the starter will be extremely hungry. Now that the starter is already active, I will start letting it ferment at lower temperature. The first reason is so that the starter doesn't get hungry very quickly, and the second reason is because I do not like acidic breads. So I want my starter to be mild in flavor. If starter ferments at higher temperature, more than 30 degrees Celsius or 86 degrees Fahrenheit, it will produce more lactic acid, which will make it more acidic. It's also true if you let it ferment at cold temperature, like for example in the fridge, it will produce more acetic acid. It has stronger flavor, almost like vinegar. For milder starter, let your starter ferment at temperature between 18 to 26 degrees Celsius or 64 to 78 degrees Fahrenheit. If your starter doesn't rise or rises a little bit, do one feeding today. While I'm putting away my sourdough discard, I need to tell you that this guide is not over yet. I will still have one more episode or part.